My name is Alina Khan. I'm 31 years old, and last week I kicked my entire family out of the house I built with my own two hands. If that shocks you, just wait. In my family, boundaries are considered disrespectful, independence is treated like rebellion, and success, especially for someone like me, is something to be rebranded as family fortune. I was raised being told that everything I did should be for us, but us never included me when I needed them. I worked night shifts, lived on instant noodles, and stayed in while everyone else flew business class to weddings and vacations. And when I finally made it, when I put my name on the deed of my own home, they walked in like they owned it. But before I tell you how that happened, and how I got even, drop a comment and subscribe. This is my story. I came home exhausted, still in scrubs after a 12-hour shift, dreaming of nothing more than hot tea and silence. But as I stepped inside, silence was the first thing missing. My sister Sana stood in the foyer, holding a key I never gave her. Perfect timing, she said cheerfully, as if she lived here. Can you help me move some of these boxes? I blinked. Boxes? Behind her, movers carried in floral arrangements, folding chairs, and a massive white rug. In the kitchen, my mother was writing on a clipboard. Alina, we need you to clear out your bedroom by Friday, she said without looking up. Sana's Mendy outfits need to be steamed and laid out, and her in-laws will visit this weekend. I stood frozen. Wait. What's going on? My mother looked up, finally registering my confusion. Oh, we decided it's easiest to host the wedding events here, she said, matter-of-factly. It's the biggest house in the family. My house. Bought with my salary. Built from years of skipped vacations and overnights at the hospital, and where am I supposed to stay? I asked. Well, Sana said, not meeting my eye, maybe you could stay at Rabia Khala's? Just until the wedding's over. My stomach turned. They had decided everything without me. My house wasn't mine anymore, it was just convenient, they say some families are warm and nurturing, a place you return to for support. Mine was more like a boardroom where your worth was measured by results. My older brother, Imran, was the model Morgan child, business degree at 22, married by 25, father at 27, and regional director by 30. Every achievement was met with thunderous applause. My mother would beam as if she'd earned the promotion herself. I remember overhearing her once on the phone, saying, Imran is everything I prayed for, driven, respectable, stable. I was in the next room, painting barefoot on the balcony. She didn't know I heard, growing up, our house had unspoken rankings. Imran, then everyone else. I wasn't rebellious, just different. I liked color where they wanted gray. While Imran played financial simulation games and wrote essays on macroeconomics, I was outside with a sketchbook, drawing the neighborhood aunties and their chaotic flower beds. I'd get lost in art the way Imran got lost in numbers, but only one of us was ever praised for it.by 14, I'd won my first regional art competition. My school principal told my mother I had real talent. She smiled politely, then said, she needs to focus on something practical. The certificate went into a drawer. Forgotten. Meanwhile, Imran got a leather briefcase for winning a school debate about property investment. When I turned 18 and told my parents I wanted to pursue art school, the house fell into an eerie silence. My mother's spoon clinked sharply against her teacup. Art? As in, drawing? My father just looked over his glasses and asked, you want to waste your intellect? They sent brochures for accounting programs to my email inbox every week for months. My mother began introducing me at family events as Alina, our creative spirit, just taking some time to explore before real life begins. At a wedding, an aunt smiled at me pityingly and asked, so when do you start a proper degree? I tried not to let it cut. I laughed it off. But inside, I was shrinking. My art became my therapy. While my family discussed Imran's investment portfolio at the dinner table, I sketched them silently. The way my mother's face tightened whenever I said studio. The way Imran's voice took on an edge whenever I spoke about my freelance clients. Once, I made a painting of our family dinner, exaggerated, almost caricatured. My mother saw it by accident and frowned. That's harsh, she said. Are we really so cold? I wanted to say yes. But I didn't. In my 20s, I worked side jobs to pay for studio space. Sold small portraits. Painted murals in local cafes. And still, the narrative at home was that I was finding myself. Imran was launching property ventures, making headlines in finance blogs. My mother kept laminated copies in her drawer every time I came home, which was rare. I felt like a foreigner in my own family. My bedroom had been turned into a guest room with beige walls and no trace of me. My mother would still call Imran's room, even though he hadn't lived there in years. At family dinners, they'd ask me how my hobby was going. Or suggest I should help Imran with his branding, as if my entire skill set existed only to support his legacy. Once, when I was struggling financially, I asked my parents if I could move back temporarily. Just for a few months, to catch my breath. My father said, "We don't want you to get too comfortable, it might delay your career maturity." Imran offered his basement apartment. But not for free. He said, "You can paint there, sure. But I'd expect a cut of anything you sell." I declined. It was that moment, standing outside their house with my suitcase, that I decided I would make it on my own. Not because I didn't love them, but because I couldn't keep shrinking just to fit into their version of success. Over the next 2 years, I poured everything into my work. I taught kids workshops, took commissions for local magazines, started building an online presence, slowly, quietly. One of my pieces, a portrait series of working-class women, went semi-viral. A well-known gallery reached out. The day I signed my first exhibition contract, I cried for hours. Not out of joy, out of grief. Because the first thing I thought was, they're not going to care. And I was right. When I called to share the news, my mother said, "That's nice, Beta. Imran just bought a second property. Isn't that amazing?" So I stopped trying to tell them. I let them believe whatever they wanted. That I was drifting, lost, unrooted. While in reality, I was building something sacred, a career, a reputation, a name that belonged to me. The irony? When I finally had enough to buy a small house, a fixer-upper I renovated with sweat and scraped savings, they acted proud. Not because of what I had done, but because they could now say, "Alina owns property too." Like that made it valid. And then came the wedding. My sister Sana, the youngest, announced her engagement with great fanfare. The family decided that my house, being centrally located and tastefully decorated, would be perfect for the Mendi, Dolki, and bridal prep. I wasn't asked. I was told. The group chat was full of logistics: who would sleep where, what kind of lighting I had, whether I could move my art to make room for decorations. My objections were met with guilt trips. "Come on, Alina," my mother said. "It's just for a few days. You're the most free one right now. We all have jobs and kids." Imran added, "Think of it as your contribution." Contribution. If the roof over my head wasn't something I'd bled for. As if my boundaries were optional. I agreed. But something inside me cracked. This wasn't about family anymore, it was about control. The same control they'd exercised my whole life. They saw my space as theirs. My time as theirs. My success as a fluke. So when I stood in my own living room days later, and saw Sana barking orders at a decorator, my mother taping seating charts to my kitchen cabinets, and Imran adjusting fairy lights over my fireplace like he owned the place, I realized something: they weren't going to stop unless I made them, not with words. With actions. It was my grandfather's 80th birthday, a grand affair at the family estate that looked more like a political fundraiser than a celebration of life. Polished marble floors, imported orchids, waitstaff in tuxedos, everything was designed to reflect legacy, wealth, and tradition. I had arrived early, wearing a navy blue jumpsuit I had designed and stitched myself. I felt confident, even hopeful. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today, they'd see me. The guests trickled in: business partners, second cousins, old college friends of my uncle's, all dressed in muted tones of power and propriety. My art, as always, had no place here. I offered to create a custom piece for Dada's birthday gift, a portrait inspired by his childhood photos, but my mother had quickly declined. "We're commissioning something more timeless," she'd said. "A painting by a real artist." The comment had stung. But I said nothing. As the evening wore on, the family gathered in the grand hall for speeches. My uncle Imran went first, delivering a polished tribute laced with investment jokes and stories about how Dada taught him to buy low, sell high. The crowd chuckled politely. My aunt followed with a sentimental note about how Dada made the best tea and gave the wisest advice. My mother gave a short, poised speech, her eyes shimmering with restrained pride. Then Dada stood up. He was weaker now, thinner than I remembered, but the room still quieted with respect as he took the microphone. 80 years, he began. Not bad for a man who came to this country with a briefcase and a dream. The room erupted in applause. He nodded, gesturing for silence. I built a company, a family, a name. And when I look at my grandchildren, I see the continuation of that legacy. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he would mention me. He began listing names, praising degrees, promotions, marriages. When he spoke of Imran, he said, "A born leader. He will carry the Morgan name far." For my cousin Sarah, compassionate, grounded, a true Morgan heart. One by one, he named them. Until finally, and Layla, my breath caught. He looked at me, his eyes pausing, searching, then his tone changed. "Layla is still exploring her path. A dreamer. Creative, yes, But, he smiled, but it was the kind meant to soften a blow. We hope she finds her direction soon. The words hung in the air like a stain on white linen. Polite laughter followed, not cruel, but pitiful. Someone clapped awkwardly. My mother glanced down at her glass. My father didn't look at me at all. My face burned. I smiled tightly and nodded, because what else could I do? Stand up and announce, actually, I've sold out 3 galleries this year? That I had more followers on social media than their firms had clients? That my work, my art, paid my rent, but no. I was just the dreamer. The drifting one. The disappointment in a nice outfit. After the speeches, I stepped out into the garden, away from the chatter. The fairy lights cast soft shadows over the lawn, and somewhere, a string quartet played a slow instrumental piece. I stared out at the hedges, breathing slowly, trying not to cry. A voice behind me said, "Tough room tonight, huh?" It was my younger cousin Adil. He offered me a glass of sparkling water. That was brutal. I forced a laugh. Parfois de course. They just don't get it, he said. What you do, it's not in their vocabulary. They're wired for resumes, not revolutions. I looked at him sharply, surprised by the insight. He shrugged. I see your work online, you know. It's powerful stuff. For a moment, I almost cried, not from pain, but from relief. From being seen, but the feeling passed quickly. Because even if Adil saw me, the ones who mattered, the ones who had shaped my sense of self, did not. They never had. Later that night, I found my mother in the kitchen, rearranging platters. You didn't have to laugh, I said quietly. She turned. At what? When Dada said I was just a dreamer. She hesitated. He didn't mean it. As an insult. But you didn't defend me. She sighed. Layla, this is not about defending. Your grandfather has his way of seeing the world. And you? She wiped her hands on a linen napkin. I want you to be happy. I just don't want you to struggle. I swallowed hard. I'm not struggling. You live in a rental. You don't have a steady income. I own every hour of my day, I said, my voice rising. I wake up and create things that didn't exist before. That means something. My mother looked at me, eyes tired. It's just, not the Morgan way. There it was. The box. The standard. The invisible wall I'd been slamming into my whole life. I didn't argue. I just left. I in the car, parked outside the estate gates. I sat in silence. My phone buzzed. A message from a gallery in Berlin. We'd love to feature your Daughters of Dust series. When can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, then I started typing. Not a reply, but a plan. The wound was fresh. Raw. But it was also fuel. They wanted me to have direction. I'd give them one dot and it would lead exactly where. They never thought I could go. 2 weeks after the birthday dinner, Layla lost her job. It wasn't glamorous, just a part-time studio assistant gig at a boutique art space that paid her enough to cover groceries and keep her phone bill afloat. But it was hers. It made her feel useful. Connected. Grounded in the creative world she belonged to. The email was short. Due to financial constraints, we regretfully have to let you go. This is not a reflection of your performance. Thank you. For your time. She stared at the screen, numb. Then she exhaled through her teeth, clicked the red X, and sat back. Outside, traffic groaned past her apartment window. A cat stretched lazily on the sill. The world moved on, indifferent. Her landlord had already been patient with her once. But she knew she had no buffer this time. No soft landing. Her savings were nearly gone. She had sold a few paintings in the past months, but nothing consistent. Her art was starting to feel like a ghost, present in her mind but invisible in her hands. Within a week, she was out. She packed her belongings, mostly art supplies, notebooks, a kettle, and a mattress, into 2 suitcases and a plastic storage box. The rest she gave away or left behind. The new place was a 1-room flat in a crumbling building tucked behind a laundromat. It had peeling paint, a single window, and the smell of rusted water pipes. But it was cheap. And hers. The first night, she sat on the floor in silence, surrounded by the echo of her own choices. No job. No income. No family to lean on. After the dinner, she hadn't answered any calls. Her mother had left 2 voicemails, one polite, one laced with frustration. You're being dramatic, Layla. Come home. We can talk. But Layla didn't want to talk. She was done explaining herself to people who had already decided who she was, or who she was not. She blocked them all. No mother. No dada. No golden boy. Brother or dismissive aunt. The line between them had been fraying for years. She simply cut it the rest of the way. The silence was sharp at first. But after a few days, it softened. It wrapped around her like a weighted blanket. Heavy, yes. But calming. Honest. She lay on the mattress under a bare bulb, staring at the ceiling. This was rock bottom. No job. No home. No support, only herself, only her art. She sat up, then she stood, she pulled out her sketchbook, the one she hadn't opened since the dinner, and set it on the small table. Her fingers hovered over the cover for a second, like she was touching a wound. Then she opened it, page after blank page stared up at her, and then, she started with a line. Then another. A swirl. A jawline. A shoulder curved forward in defiance. A girl. Eyes closed. Head tilted up. Hair wild. No jewelry. No name, just power. She drew another. This time, a woman crouched in a factory, welding something under moonlight. Her hands were strong. Her arms had smudges of charcoal, and then another, a veiled woman seated on a throne of cracked marble, one hand clutching a paintbrush like a scepter, the other holding a mirror. The reflection showed fire. She didn't stop drawing for hours. It poured out of her like a storm. Fury, humiliation, hunger, grief, determination, all of it found its way into strokes, lines, shapes, shades. She sketched until her wrist ached and her eyes blurred. When she looked at the pages, she saw something she hadn't seen in weeks. Herself, not the version her family refused to see, not the weak girl they pitted, not the dreamer with no direction. She saw a fighter. A visionary. A woman burning with clarity. A whisper sparked in her chest. What if these weren't just sketches? What if this was the beginning of something bigger? She flipped to a clean page and wrote the words at the top, Layla, the brand, underneath. She began mapping out ideas, messy, raw, but electric. A wearable art line. Clothing that tells stories. Each piece connected to the portraits she drew. Real stories of real women. Misfits. Underdogs. Survivors. The brand would be more than fashion, it would be resistance. It would say, we are not invisible. It would be the armor she never had growing up. She scribbled in the margins, street couture meets inner fire. Designed by the dismissed. Worn by the undefeated. Every piece tells a truth they told us to silence. She was buzzing. Her pulse racing. She didn't have investors, she didn't have connections, she didn't have anything that traditionally spelled success. But what she did have was fire. Talent. Purpose. And absolutely nothing left to lose. She stared out the window. It had started to rain, thin lines running down the glass like tears. But she wasn't crying. She hadn't felt this alive in months. Later that night, as she sat cross-legged on the mattress surrounded by paper, pencil shavings, and half-burnt incense, she made a promise. To herself. To the girl who had been told she was too sensitive. To the teenager whose sketches were called a phase. To the woman who had just been erased at her own grandfather's birthday dinner. You're not small. You're not lost. You're just not theirs anymore. The morning after her creative storm, Layla woke up different, not transformed, not yet, but centered. Still. Like something heavy had finally settled into place inside her. She brewed instant coffee in her tiny flat, flipped open her sketchbook, and stared at the night's work. Pages and pages of fierce, unflinching women, fighters, architects, dancers, welders, mothers. Not broken. Not meek. Bold. Complex. And one word kept circling in her mind. Unseen. Layla had always felt invisible in her family, the background noise to her brother's accolades, the soft afterthought to her mother's expectations. Even her father, with his gentle smiles, never fought for her voice at the table. But maybe that invisibility had a use now. She could move in silence. Create without permission. Build without applause. She wouldn't ask them to see her anymore. She would create a world where women like her were unignorable. She opened her laptop and bought a domain name, unseen.studio. She chose a pseudonym for the site's creator, L. Ryan. Ryan, meaning gates of paradise. A name with strength and softness both. Not quite anonymous, but far enough from Layla Rahman to keep her identity safely tucked away. She wasn't hiding, she was protecting the seed of something sacred. For weeks, she lived like a shadow, moving between shifts at a local bookstore, working late into the night designing her collection. She sourced plain clothing from ethical blank suppliers and used her sketches as heat-pressed prints. Each piece came with a handwritten tag, a quote, a one-line story, a quiet war cry. She couldn't afford to hire a model, so she used herself. With a timer camera and sheets pinned to the wall, she posed in dim light, half her face always obscured. The brand aesthetic was intentional: grayscale tones, raw fabrics, defiant eyes, brushstrokes across the chest like war paint. Unpolished. Untamed. Undeniable. She launched the site on a Sunday. No fanfare. No announcements. Just a post from at unseen.studio on Instagram with a caption, "This isn't fashion. It's survival." She thought maybe her best friend Maya would buy something. Maybe a few strangers. She told herself 10 orders in the first month would be a win. She got 22 in the first 3 days. By the end of the first week, the number had doubled. They weren't just buying, they were sharing. Women were tagging at unseen.studio. In stories, standing tall in alleyways and tiny apartments, wearing shirts that said things like, "I was not built to disappear." "Soft is not weak." "Daughters of fire don't ask for light." The comment sections flooded, "Whoever's behind this gets it." Finally. Something that speaks for us. Not just clothes, this feels like armor. Layla sat in her flat at midnight, watching as her follower count ticked upward like a heartbeat. She didn't post selfies. She didn't do founder videos. She let the work speak, and the work? It roared when the first influencer, a queer Pakistani artist named Zoya, shared a story in one of Layla's jackets with the caption, "For the first time, I feel seen." Sales exploded, she cried that night. Not because of the numbers, but because someone had felt seen. That had always been the dream, even when she couldn't name it. With each order she packed, each name she handwrote, she stitched her own worth back together. Slowly. Quietly. No one from her family knew, and that felt perfect. Her brother posted a new job promotion on LinkedIn. Her mother sent another, "Hope you're okay," text she didn't reply to. Her father's birthday came and went. None of them knew that Layla, the dreamer, the disappointment, was running a rising fashion collective that had been reposted by two celebrities and featured on a feminist art blog with the headline, "Unseen Studio is the voice of a silenced generation." They didn't need to know, not yet. Layla's small room was now a studio. The mattress was pushed into a corner, and the walls were lined with folded inventory, thread, and garment racks. Her savings had slowly begun to return, and for the first time, they weren't a gift or a favor. She was building a life on her own terms, but it wasn't without struggle. There were returns. Missed shipments. Nights she questioned the point of it all. Days when imposter syndrome whispered, "You're just playing dress up. Who do you think you are?" But then she'd get a message from a girl in Lebanon or a woman in Detroit, "Your words gave me courage. I wore your hoodie to my divorce hearing. Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." This wasn't just business. It was reclamation. Layla kept her face hidden, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted anyone to see themselves in the clothes. It wasn't about fame. It was about reflection, and yet, with every milestone, a part of her began to wonder, will I always have to hide? Will I ever be able to show the world who I really am? But that moment wasn't for now. Now was for building a brick by quiet brick, alone, but no longer unseen. Layla sat on the floor of her flat, surrounded by orders that wouldn't fit in her shelves anymore. Hoodie after hoodie, box after box. Unseen had outgrown her apartment. What started with sketches and midnight printing runs was now something else entirely. Something bigger. She looked around at the walls once covered in taped up inspiration quotes and fabric samples. They were now filled with invoices, supplier contacts, and shipping zones. Her hands were covered in ink and tape burns. But for the first time in her life, the chaos felt earned. Her phone buzzed. Investor call, 12:30 p.m. "Maya, you ready to charm them?" Smirking face. Layla smiled. She didn't feel charming. She felt exhausted. But driven. Her friend Maya had helped her connect with a few ethical fashion investors, quietly, under NDAs, still under the name L. Ryan. No one, except Maya, knew that. The quiet girl with the studio in a shoebox apartment was the force behind the brand now going viral for giving voice to the overlooked. The investors loved what they saw: strong engagement, explosive organic growth, and a bold brand voice that spoke to something deeper than trends. What they didn't expect was her. At 12:30, she appeared in the Zoom call, plain black tee, sleek ponytail, simple background. Professional, calm, and direct. "Thank you for your time," she began. Unseen isn't about seasonal drops. It's about culture. It's about making women feel powerful when the world tries to reduce them. She showed them her numbers. High conversion rates, repeat customer stats, social virality. But more than that, she told them about impact. People aren't just buying hoodies, she said. They're buying permission to be loud. They're buying the right to be angry, joyful, complicated. We're not selling fabric. We're selling a feeling, and that's hard to replicate. By the end of the call, 2 investors offered seed rounds. A week later, Layla signed her first funding deal, enough to lease a small studio space, upgrade her equipment, and finally, stop handpacking every order herself. Still, she kept her name hidden. All contracts were under L. Ryan. Her image never appeared online. No family ties. No clues, not because she was afraid of failing anymore, but because success, built in silence, had become its own kind of power. At the next family gathering, her cousin Zane's engagement party, Layla arrived in a modest dress, no makeup, her curls loosely tied back. Her mother greeted her with the usual once-over. "You look tired," she said, almost with concern. "Are you still doing that art thing?" "It's keeping me busy," Layla replied with a small smile. Her older brother, Rami, gave her a pat on the shoulder as he passed. "You ever think about getting serious, Layla? Dad's accountant has an opening." She didn't flinch. She didn't explain that while they were discussing job openings, she was finalizing a distribution deal that would place her designs in select ethical boutiques in New York and London. That she'd just hired her 5th team member. That her anonymous TEDx talk, given through voiceover with her art visuals, had just hit 1.2 million views. No. She just sipped her tea, offered polite nods, and sat quietly while the family discussed real estate and business deals around her. Let them think she was invisible, let them underestimate her. Every dismissal was more fuel. At the new studio, a sunlit space in a converted warehouse near the river, she began to build the team that would scale unseen into a movement. There was Aman, a production coordinator who had fled the corporate world in search of meaningful work. Zoe, a graphic designer with a background in protest art. Tariq, a digital strategist whose own immigrant family had never believed in creative careers. Together, they weren't just building a brand, they were building a belief system. Layla gave each new hire a card on their first date at IT. Read, "You are not here to fit in. You are here to break what doesn't work." Ryan sales tripled in 6 months, when a high-profile actress wore an unseen jacket on a talk show and quoted the tagline, "Not built to disappear." The team celebrated with cheap champagne and pizza on the studio floor, and still, her family remained unaware. Her mother occasionally sent job listings. Her brother tagged her in self-help productivity reels. Her father occasionally asked if she needed a loan, and Layla? She kept smiling politely, but inside, she was building an empire brick by brick, not in rebellion, but in sovereignty. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving herself right. The sky was gray the day of the will reading, as if even the weather understood the weight of the occasion. Layla sat in the corner of the ornate study, surrounded by mahogany shelves stacked with first edition books her grandfather used to read to her from when no one else noticed she existed. The room was full, her mother in her signature pearls, her father stiff in a navy pinstripe suit, Rami postured confidently near the fireplace, and every other family member dressed in various shades of quiet expectation. Grandfather's passing had left a quiet ache in her chest, not because he had ever openly defended her, but because he saw her. In small glances, in faint smiles, in the way he once whispered, "You're not like the rest of us. That's not a weakness." The lawyer, Mr. Shah, the family's estate attorney for 2 decades, stood at the head of the long table with a brown envelope in hand. When he cleared his throat, the room instantly quieted. "My name is Yusuf Shah. As you all know, I was appointed by the late Mr. Ibrahim Karim to execute his will. He left very specific instructions." Everyone leaned forward, some subtly, some eagerly. Shah began with the formalities. To his wife, his beloved garden. To his 3 children, his properties divided equally. Small charitable donations. A few surprise gifts. Layla half listened. Her name hadn't come up, and she didn't expect it to. Grandfather had always played neutral in family politics, but then, now, regarding the allocation of Mr. Karim's business assets, specifically, his private shares and investment holdings, he left a letter to be read aloud. Shah pulled out a handwritten page and adjusted his glasses. "If you are hearing this, I have already left this world, hopefully peacefully and with my favorite song playing in the background. I've built many things in my lifetime, businesses, buildings, legacies. But none have made me prouder than seeing something new emerge from the ashes of tradition." Confused glances darted across the room. "Years ago, I made a private investment. A silent one. In a startup that reminded me of what it feels like to build something that matters. I kept it quiet, not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted the founder to rise without my name, without shortcuts, and without the suffocation of our family name." Layla froze. Her hands clenched the edges of her coat. She could feel every heartbeat in her throat. Shah continued, "Today, I bequeath all my remaining private equity holdings, including 15% of my estate's liquid assets and voting shares in Karim Ventures, to the founder of that company, a woman I believe represents the future of our family. Not because she followed the rules, but because she had the courage to break them." A beat of silence, then Shah looked directly at her. "Layla Karim. You could have heard a pin drop." "What?" Rami snapped, half standing. "That's not possible," her mother gasped, clutching her scarf. She's just." Layla didn't speak. Her face was calm, but her insides churned like a storm. "She is the founder," Shah confirmed. "Your father made the investment under NDA, under the alias Ryan. I have the documentation here." He pulled out a folder and laid it flat. For all to see, unseen as Layla Karim's creation. Mouths opened. Eyes darted. The silence was jagged, awkward. Her uncle shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane. She's been hiding. Building," Layla corrected quietly. Rami laughed bitterly. "So that's where you've been, playing CEO in secret while the rest of us were trying to carry the family name." "I wasn't trying to carry the name," she replied. "I was trying to carry myself. Something none of you ever taught me how to do." Her mother blinked at her, lips parted in stunned silence. You were always so lost. So unprepared. No. Layla said, standing slowly. You just never asked the right questions. You judged the cover and never read the story. This is ridiculous, Rami spat. Dad would have never, he did, Shah said firmly. The shares are legally transferred. This is not up for debate. Rami's jaw tightened. Her mother looked near tears. Layla held her ground. I never wanted what you all wanted for me, she said evenly. I tried to fit in. I tried to make you proud. But every time I mentioned art or technology or me, you shut it down. No one shut you down, her mother said, her voice rising. You did, Layla cut in. With every eye roll. Every concerned conversation. Every time you told people I was still finding myself when I was out there building something you couldn't even imagine. Shah cleared his throat once more. The late Mr. Karim also requested that this message be read in full. He unfolded a second note. To Layla, you once asked me if dreams were worth chasing when no one else believes in them. I didn't answer you then. But I'm answering now. Yes, they are. Especially when they scare people. Especially when they make the world uncomfortable. I watched you in silence, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to stop your momentum. The others would have drowned you in their expectations. I wanted to see you rise. And you did. Tears prickled at Layla's eyes, but she held her chin high. The room was still in shock. Her aunt looked ready to faint. Her cousin whispered too. Another cousin, she really is the founder? I bought one of those jackets, but Layla wasn't looking at them anymore. She looked at the window. At the gray sky finally cracking open with sunlight. She had spent so long waiting for a seat at the table, she didn't need it anymore. She'd built her own. The lawyer's final words still hung in the air like the echo of a bell struck too hard. No one moved. The ornate study, once a throne room of Karim family tradition, had transformed into a battlefield of disbelief. Layla stood quietly, the magazine with her face on it still resting beside the folder of legal documents. She hadn't sat back down. She wasn't sure she ever would again, not in this room, not in this family, not in the same way. Rami broke the silence first. This is a joke, he said, voice sharp, forced. A PR stunt. This whole thing, it's an illusion. No, Rami, the lawyer said, calmly tapping the folder. It's legal. And it's binding. You don't just become someone overnight, her mother said, looking at Layla. Like a stranger. You don't just bypass all of this. She motioned to the room, the family, the legacy. I didn't become someone overnight, Layla replied, her voice even but laced with quiet steel. You just never noticed who I already was. Her mother opened her mouth, but no words came. Layla took a slow step forward, her heels echoing lightly across the polished wood floor. All my life, she began, scanning their faces, you told me I was almost enough. Almost focused. Almost driven. Almost something to be proud of. But never quite. Not like Rami. Not like the sons, or the investors, or the Ivy League degrees. She turned to her uncle. You laughed at my art shows. Called them colorful tantrums. To her aunt. You said a woman's value is in her ability to support her husband's legacy. And then to her mother. You called me a dreamer. Not with love, but as a warning. Her mother's eyes glistened. Whether it was shame or anger, Layla didn't care anymore. But here's the thing, Layla continued. You don't get to mock the journey and then demand a seat at the destination. Rami scoffed. Oh please, save the TED Talk. You think just because you have money now, you're above us? No, she said. I think I'm finally beside you, which is what you were afraid of all along. She stepped closer to the family crest hanging over the fireplace, the gilded symbol they'd all grown up revering like scripture. Grandfather knew, she said. He saw through the performance. Through the obsession with maintaining appearances. He saw what I was building and chose to invest, not just with money, but with belief. And none of you knew, because you were too busy managing perception. To recognize innovation. Her uncle stepped forward, voice trembling. But shares? Voting power? This changes everything. I know, Layla said simply, you could dismantle everything we've built, or improve it. She cut in. Rami's eyes narrowed. Don't pretend you care about this family's future. Layla gave a sad smile. I care more than you think. That's why I worked in silence. That's why I didn't burn it all down when I could have. But I won't play by your rules just to be let in. Those days are over. Her cousin Maha, always the quiet one, spoke for the first time. But why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you say you were struggling, or that you were building something so big? Because I wasn't building it for you, Layla replied gently. I was building it for every version of me who was told to be smaller, quieter, easier to digest. The room shifted. A slow, dawning discomfort took root in their eyes. Some of them, for the first time, looked inward. Her mother sat down, heavily. I just didn't know you were in pain. I know, Layla said, her voice soft. Now. You never asked. A long pause. I'm not here for revenge, she continued. I'm here to draw a line. I'll be at board meetings. I'll vote. I'll lead. And I'll do it without screaming, begging, or explaining myself every step of the way. Her voice never rose. But the weight of her words stilled the room more effectively than shouting ever could. I don't need your congratulations, she added. Or your approval. I needed that once. I don't anymore. She picked up the magazine. Turned toward the door. That little girl you ignored at family dinners? She owns 15% of your future now. Shaw gave her a respectful nod as she walked past. At the threshold, she paused, not for drama, but for closure. I'll see you at the quarterly review, she said, with the ghost of a smile. Try to be on time. And then she left. Not with defiance, not with bitterness, but with freedom. Outside, the sun had finally broken fully through the clouds, casting long golden light across the marble walkway. Layla didn't look back, because for the first time in her life, she didn't have to. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the top floor of Layla's headquarters. Her headquarters, glass walls surrounded the space, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline bathed in morning light. The office was modern, minimalist, filled with natural wood and soft textures. A quiet sanctuary of vision and resolve. She stepped out, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. As she walked through the open workspace, her employees greeted her with quiet smiles and nods, respectful, warm. No one rushed to impress her. No one doubted her place anymore. The company had grown. Departments hummed with life. Conference rooms hosted passionate debates. The art department, her favorite, displayed fresh concepts on giant storyboards. There were reminders everywhere that her vision had taken root, not just in code or contracts, but in people. She paused at a framed photograph hung discreetly in the hallway. It was a team photo, the original 5. Layla, still anonymous then, standing beside the engineers and designers who had believed in her before the headlines. Before the legacy claims. Before the world knew her name. She smiled. It wasn't a nostalgic smile, or a performative one. It was the smile of someone who had traveled 1,000 invisible miles, and survived. Her assistant approached. The board reports are on your desk. Investors are thrilled with the latest adoption stats. And, she hesitated, your mother called. She said no pressure, but she'd love to have lunch, just the two of you. Layla nodded, thoughtful. Tell her I'll call her this weekend. As the assistant walked away, Layla continued toward her office, the corner suite her family had once assumed she'd never deserve. The irony wasn't lost on her. But neither was the growth. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Her office door slid open. Silently. The room was filled with sunlight and quiet. On her desk sat a single object, a leather-bound journal. Not a planner. A relic from her early days when she'd write sketches, business ideas, and little quotes that kept her going. She opened it to the first page. Someday they'll know. That's all it said. 3 words, written in rushed pen during her loneliest nights in the one-room flat. Nights when ramen was a luxury, and self-doubt was louder than ambition. She had written that sentence not with arrogance, but with hope. With grit. With something deeper than belief, something ancestral, maybe. Something unkillable. Layla ran her fingers over the page, then gently closed the book. She walked to the window, arms folded, and looked out over the city. Her city. It wasn't about the skyscrapers or the millions in revenue or even the title of CEO. It was about the woman she had become. The one who no longer asked for permission to exist as herself. She thought of her grandfather, the only one who had believed in her without saying much. She remembered the night she told him the truth, the week before his health had turned. How he'd listened, nodded, and then said, simply, do it your way. The world needs more of that. She had, and now, as her reflection stared back at her from the window, confident, composed, completely unhidden, Layla realized something. She didn't just survive her family's expectations. She rewrote them, not with revenge. Not with rage. But with quiet power, built brick by brick in the shadows until the whole world had no choice but to see her. And now that they did? She wasn't asking for applause, she was building even more. My name is Layla. I'm 29 now, and if you've listened this far, you probably already know the kind of silence I once lived in. The weight of being overlooked. The sting of being laughed at. The ache of showing up to a table where no one expects anything from you, except failure. So if you've ever been made to feel small, if you've ever been called too sensitive, too unrealistic, too much, let me say this clearly, you are not the problem. The problem is the world that fears what it doesn't understand. The problem is families that measure worth by legacy, not heart. The problem is systems that reward loud mediocrity but punish quiet brilliance. I used to think I had to prove something to them. That if I just succeeded loud enough, they'd see me differently, love me differently. But here's the truth, you don't have to prove yourself to them, not your parents. Not your ex. Not the boss who overlooked you. Not the friend who only calls when they need something, you prove yourself to yourself. That's all. When I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, sketching business ideas by the glow of my phone screen, no one clapped. No one believed. No one cared, and that was a gift, because I learned to clap for myself. I learned to believe, even when I had no reason to. I learned that building in silence is not weakness, it's strength. Now, the people who doubted me quote my name in boardrooms. The ones who called me too emotional want to be part of my company's vision. The family who said I was chasing a fantasy now brags about me at fundraisers, but this story? It's not about revenge. It's about rebirth. If you're still in your silent season, still building, still crying in secret, still doubting, let me tell you something from the other side, you are not alone. One day, your work will speak louder than any apology ever could. So don't shrink. Don't rush. Don't explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Build. Heal. Create. Stay private until it's time to be undeniable, and when that day comes, stand tall. Speak softly. And smile, not for them, but for you, because you didn't need their permission to begin with, you just needed time to become exactly who you were always meant to be.